Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting to order. Please note it is being recorded and viewable on ActonTV. If anyone in the audience is recording it personally, please let me know. I see no one indicating that, so we will move to our first agenda item, which is citizens' concerns. Please come up, say your name and your address, and speak to us.
Hi, it's Tara from Upper Mass Ave, and I just have a quick comment relative to the Hayward light, because in the capital plan, it was combined with sidewalks and said to be a select board goal, and the select board goal was about sidewalks, it wasn't about a light. And so I just want to say that it looks like there's a group of residents that are going to pull that item out if it ends up on the town meeting warrant for a separate vote. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is the current fiscal year Q1 update.
Right, so good evening. I'm Mary Ann Fleckner, Director of Administration and Finance. I'm here with my colleague, Ellie Anderson. She's the awesome financial solutions analyst. She did not pay me to say that. And what we're presenting in front of you today is the Q1 report. Last time we were in front of you was the Q3 report. Q4, just FYI, is our audit instead of a Q4 report. So it's not that we missed it, it's just that it goes to Q1. What we'll be presenting to you tonight is expenses, revenues overall for the general fund and our enterprise funds. We're very confident that overall everything looks good on target. There are some issues that we just want to point out to you that we will present when it comes to that particular section. But overall is that we are on target, and when you see these percentages, you'll see why I'm saying that. Also, after tonight, not right now, but after tonight on tomorrow's homepage, that you will see the full quarterly report under the heading budget for this detailed information that we present to you tonight in a summarized fashion for the PowerPoint presentation. So with that is I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ellie, and we will first go over general and then the enterprise funds.
So looking at the general fund for the purposes of Q1, we're comparing collections to the ALG plan that was published in last year's town meeting warrant for fiscal year 2024. So as you can see, when it comes to property taxes, we're just over 25% collected, which is exactly where we would like to be at this time of the year. State aid has come in at almost 29% collected, and local receipts are at just over 18% collected. So cumulatively, when you add all of this up versus what we had posted on the ALG plan, we're at 24.97% collected, so right on target. And then regarding expenses, on the municipal side, about $12.5 million has been expended so far in the fiscal year. This comes out to almost 34%. Just as a reminder, the Middlesex County retirement assessment as well as OPEB, those are paid out of the finance director's budget on day one, which kind of creates a higher percentage spent than 25%. So next we'll transition into the enterprise funds. As you know, we have 5 of them. So for the Septage Enterprise Fund, approved at annual town meeting was a budget of just over $164,000. This included a fund balance reservation from retained earnings of just over $14,000, And at this point, with Q1, the fund has collected 16% of its revenue target and has expended just over 20%. The transfer station had a budget approved at town meeting of just under $765,000. This included a pledge from retained earnings of just under $115,000. And so far at this point in the fiscal year, the fund is just under 48% collected and just under 18% expended. The Sewer Enterprise Fund had an approved budget of just over $2.3 million. Of this, we had 2 usages of retained earnings, one coming from free cash. That was just over $344,000. And we also had a transfer of $350,000 from the Sewer Stabilization Fund. And that was appropriated for the purpose of paying for fire suppression upgrades in the 2024 budget. So when you subtract those 2 things out, we expect to collect just over 1.6 million. And at this point in the year, we're 27.6% collected, and we've expended around 24%. The Ambulance Enterprise Fund had an approved budget of just over 1.8 million. From a revenue perspective, this includes appropriation of just under 250,000 from retained earnings, as well as a general fund subsidy of just under 328,000. So at this point in the year, the fund is 31.57% collected and just under 25% expended. And finally, we have the Transportation Enterprise Fund. This fund also receives a general fund subsidy. So what was approved at town meeting was just under $578,000. It pulled $197,000 from retained earnings and received a general fund subsidy of $150,000. At this point in the year, it's just under 15% collected and only 1.35% expended. The reason for this is twofold. One, the fund has a number of funding sources. It has a revolving fund and it also has grants. And this also boils down to kind of a timing issue with when the quarter closed. There were some bills that got paid right at the beginning of October that aren't reflected in these numbers. And that's it. We're happy to take any questions.
Adam?
Thank you. So right off the bat, I noticed it looked as though we transferred money out of the sewer retained earnings and used for what looked like a capital item in the operating budget or in the town budget outside of the sewer, or was that fire suppression equipment for something to do with the sewer?
The $350,000 came from the Sewer Stabilization Fund, and it's specifically for fire suppression at the plant itself. So it is a sewer-related project.
Great, thank you.
Did you, Jason?
I'm assuming it's in the full report that we'll see tomorrow, but do we have the balances for the sewer stabilization fund and any of the other stabilization funds out there?
So what's included on the report are just retained earnings balances. Prior to the appropriation, the sewer stabilization had about 1.3 million in it, so now it's just under $1 million.
And where's the best place to see the roll-up of all the different funds?
The various stabilization fund balances. That's information we could get for you, but it's not included in the report that'll be published on the website.
Thank you. And the other question I have is that it looked like local receipts was running at 18%, which is not terrible at this time of year, but were we expecting it to be running right around 25? And if we were, what's running under so far this year?
So about 60% of what we expect to collect in local receipts comes from motor vehicle excise tax. And the vast majority of excise tax is billed in what's known as Commitment 1. Those bills are issued in February and they're collected in March. So we're not expecting to collect the bulk of our local receipts until after the start of the calendar year.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? I had a question on the transfer station. I thought that most of the revenue came in for September, October, and sticker fees. My recollection is that it was not, that you were at a fairly low percentage for that. Is there a reason to be concerned there? Am I just misremembering the slide?
The transfer station is just under 50% collected. And you're right, that is a reflection of the fact that the stickers are usually purchased in the fall.
I keep forgetting that your Q1 is not September.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, our next item is to discuss the capital improvement plan that was presented, was it a week ago Monday? At the December 4th Select Board meeting. Would anyone like to start? Steve, thank you.
Well, I'll start with the good news. The total investment in this plan for the years 25 through 34 is 20% less than the total investment plan for last year's plan. So since we've been looking at numbers that have been nothing but going up for the last month or so, I thought I would point out that this actually went down. It's about the same number as we had in the 23 to 32 plan. The only comments I made would be similar to what I said the other night, that even with the notations that some projects can be deferred, there's still a long way to go to get down to at least what the ALG plan was saying free cash usage would be. So other than that, I'm never going to complain about us having a 10-year capital plan, because I was one of the people that insisted we needed one many, many years ago.
Roland?
I think when we look at some of these, like the fire truck and stuff, we do have money in stabilization that we should be looking at using, as that's already been taxed to the citizens. And if you're buying a $2.1 million fire truck, maybe some of that money can come out of stabilization, so we're not bonding the whole entire purchase of it. So it's something that we need to look at our various stabilization funds as we're dealing with this budget gap in the coming year.
I think that raises the more philosophical question of, should that be considered a one-time expense? That we, along with our theory that,
What?
should a fire engine be considered a one-time expense on our guidance of using reserves? Or are we in extraordinary enough times that we don't particularly worry about that right now? As I said, it's kind of more of a philosophical argument, I think, at this point. We still have to see where everything falls out. Anyone else? Christine?
I wasn't able to make it. Does anybody want to give me the highlights? That would be really useful. All right, I'll do my homework later.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, separated into general fund projects and free cash projects. The general fund ones were the DPW facility, the fuel station, which is $2.6 million. The replacement of the aerial ladder truck, which is $2.1 million. The Complete Streets program in the Hayward Main intersection light, I believe, is $1,825,000. 91 to 21 Maple Street parking is $600,000 with a notation it could be deferred. Electrification, HVAC, and standby power for Town Hall was $2 million, again, with a notation it could be deferred at least a year. Complete Streets, Great Road, Davis to Harris, $800,000. again, with the notation it could be deferred a year. Bridge culvert design and construction, 800,000, and could be reduced or partially deferred in the next year. And the sidewalk maintenance, new construction and maintenance, 2,000,003. And town hall library parking lot improvements, 650. Again, with the possibility of deferring it into FY '26. So this is a total of 13,675,000. And the estimated annual, this is considered to be debt. So it would be an annual debt service of 1,411,000. In terms of free cash projects, there's traffic calming and intersection improvements for 50,000 and could be deferred. Prospect at Main intersection reconstruction, 400,000, could be deferred or possibly borrowed. Public safety radio system replacement, 600,000. Self-contained breathing apparatus replacement, 720,000. Railroad crossing improvements for the quiet zones, 185,000. Cemetery improvements, basically driveways and gates, 407,000, though possibly could be funded through CPA. Dam management program, 75,000, could be deferred. The master plan update, 75,000, again, could be deferred. Child care subsidy program of 40,000 with possible use of ARPA funds. Cyclical data collection, real property, this is the, whatever, every once in a while, reassessment. So that's 160,000. Family study, facility study priorities, 100,000. And Narrow Park roof improvements, 600,000, for a total of 3,407,000.
You said a child care subsidy?
Yes,
And how is that in capital?
beats me.
I can
Adam?
answer that. It was originally funded by a grant. The grant has expired, and it's a service that the town would like to continue.
But it's
Agreed, it's not capital,
not capital related.
not
Okay.
by our definition.
Okay. It doesn't sound like from that list there's anything that sort of caught anybody by surprise, or that doesn't sound like general maintenance, upkeep, running, or anything that's sort of out there that we should be keeping our eye on that would be the next, say, DPW or anything. Is there anything that like caused any controversy, or seems like, okay,
I think
it was a pretty,
what I got out of it, there is some more. Do you want?
Yeah, the general fund operating budget items, which is, these are pretty generic. Machinery, 265,000, police motor vehicles, 200,000, paving roads, 100,000, public facility building improvements, 150,000, special projects, bridge and culvert repair, 20,000, special project sidewalks, 40,000, and digitizing records for IT, 10,000, for a total of 785. And then there's special revenue and enterprise projects, which are an ambulance replacement program, ambulance enterprise replacement for command vehicles, 78,750, which could be deferred. Ambulance enterprise replace the ambulance lease payment, 148,000. Again, the ambulance enterprise replaced the 2015 Horton ambulance for 467,460. Again, could be deferred. And transportation enterprise fund, or no, that wouldn't be transportation, it would be transfer station. It's just trans. Replace grinder recycler, 40,000, for a total of 734,610.
And that list is different from the starting list because those are items that would be paid for outright, correct? Whereas the first list would be general fund borrowing or borrowing paid for out of free cash, which would then become general fund borrowing the following year, correct?
Correct.
For years to come.
Yes, but it would move into that.
just, yeah, that didn't sound like anything that really caught my ear other than the child care subsidy that seems outside of kind of a standard expected needs.
Jason?
So my comment on the capital improvement plan, yes, by all means, thank you for doing a 10-year plan. Thank you for having calling out the assumptions of what the borrowing rate would be and what the term would be. This is a great level of detail, and we're very happy to see all of that. That said, there's way more in this plan than we can afford if you add everything up. I definitely, I don't want it to just be, okay, there's nothing controversial, therefore, away we go.
I'm not saying jump in
And,
both feet, let's go.
And I'm also, I did push back on the $160,000 for the periodic review. I understand that it's best practice to have somebody come in from out of town to do it, but it's not state law. So I would love to see us do that in-house. I realize it's only 160 grand. It's not going to solve our $11 million hole, but any place that we can do it in-house, I recommend we do it in-house.
Roland?
I think some things to consider is possibly deferring some things that can be deferred that are going to be bonded, because it looks like next year the feds will be lowering the rates. They made the decision, I believe this month, that they're not going to leave rates as it is, but the market's looking at it next year that they're going to be cutting rates. So if they cut rates, then obviously it's going to translate into lower bonding rates for projects. So it's just something to consider. I mean, we don't know where, if we went out for a bond today, where the rate would fall, right? So I want the town to be very cognizant of that as they look at what's going to happen. Now, also granted that this would go to town meeting next year in July and May of '24. And we could have some rate cuts by then too. So, maybe this plays into that a little bit, but I think it's things that we need to just be cognizant of. Bonding, and, maybe not taking some of the money out of stabilization that we already have so that we're not killing our budget.
I think that raises two interesting points. What is this state of the override and how we approach it going to do to our bond rating and our ability to borrow? And the other is that we should probably be spending down our stabilization fund or at least seriously thinking about it in order to convince people that it's worth doing an override. The money should be coming from somewhere. That said, we don't want to do stabilization fund for operating expenses because that's a path to nowhere. Yeah, yes, that's correct. We cannot, in fact. But we need to make sure that it would be done, any spending out of reserves would be done in a sustainable way. Adam?
I was just going to offer my opinion on that subject, and I'm sure that many of you share the same opinion, which would be we should be spending reserves down to zero with the exception of any reserve that needs to be at a certain level to not adversely affect our bonding rate. So if we go for an override, we should go for an override that keeps our free cash at a level that keeps our debt rating at an appropriate rate. But all other reserves, if they can be spent, should be spent.
And what percentage of overall town expenditure do you feel we should hold in reserve so as not to spook S&P? Is it 3%? Is it 1%? I mean, we've given the guidance of 3 to 5 for
If they're
years.
only looking at free cash, and if they only want to see 3%, then that's the floor.
That becomes both the floor and the target in your mind. Very good. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't clarify. I just wanted to make sure to clarify that you didn't mean that you felt that the target was 0.
Marianne, from the last time we discussed using a significant chunk of reserves, I know Steve had talked to one of the bond rating agencies, I think it was, and gotten some feedback on what was a respectable level of reserves to have for them to have faith in the town. Do you have any way to track down that information? Just to have some guidance from our end on how to provide us with some guidance on what level is of reserves?
That's something that we can do, yes. To answer the question right now is, no, okay. I was going to say I don't prefer not to.
No, I don't
but
expect you to know it right now, just
we're actually having conversations with some folks over the next few days, and so that's something that we could do, yes.
Thank you. Clearly, we want to balance showing people that the town isn't holding a whole lot of money back and saying we need more, but also not kill our borrowing ability going forward.
Let me ask a question. In relation to what currently exists, Jason, like you had mentioned, the 3 to 5%, so it would be something that you would be looking for, like a comparison? Does a 3 to 5% still fall with what you're seeking, something like that? Or overall?
Does 3% give the rating agencies the heebie-jeebies and put us on a negative outlook? That's what we want to know.
Okay.
So our 3 to 5% was based effectively on DOR guidelines for what's a good reserve level. So I would hope 3% wouldn't be a problem. My question is, if we go down to 2 or 1, at what level is it a problem?
And for how long, right? So like if we did it for a year, but then came back up, would that cause a serious long-term problem?
Anything less than 3? Okay.
Dave?
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, we want to make sure we're looking at apples to apples, that the numbers we're talking about are the same ones that S&P would factor into their rating decision.
Roland?
And Mary Ann, if we could get a report on what's in the various stabilization funds too, so we know what the dollar values are.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, the select board went through and prioritized their individual items. I don't know how many of us stuck around for the rest of that section. There was some items that had multiple votes and some that didn't. They didn't come out of it with a prioritized list that the whole board agreed on, so we don't know exactly where that's going to fall. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out of that, I think, to give more guidance. We have previously expressed the sort of projects we think are a good expense in this current environment, as opposed to what we would have previously recommended. So if anyone wants to talk to that more, we can, or we can move on to our next item, which Jason, I think, is waiting impatiently for. You've had the slides up.
I had the slides because I want to make sure I don't have any technical
Okay,
stuff.
hold on.
Was there anything in that prioritization list that caught your eye that felt?
It's going to come down to, I think, to some degree, philosophy, actually, about what's important. There are some things that I looked at, sidewalks, and said, okay, in my view, we are not fully maintaining our sidewalks, so adding more is not prudent, and those could wait a year or two. And then some people are looking at saying, well, it's a safety issue, it needs to be dealt with right away. So I don't know where that's going to end up. Jason. Mr. Martin's going to come speak.
So I just took notes as to what various members of the select board supported or didn't support, and there were 6 items that members of the select board only spoke positively about. Some were mixed, all the comments were negative. The 6 large items that were only had positive comments, the large being over $500,000, are the fueling station at the DPW facility, the electrification and standby power of Town Hall, complete streets effort on Great Road between Davis and Harris Streets, the bridge and culvert design and construction, the breathing apparatus replacement for the fire department, and the public safety radio system for both fire and police. So those were the 6.
Thank you. And I recommend you look at the SIP document if you haven't. There's a very compelling photo, or at least in the presentation. No, it was the document of the state of the SCBA's to show you why we need new ones. All right, Jason, you want to take over?
Yes, thank you very much. So I pulled together a small presentation to try and definitely to address the ALG current position, and also just sort of to try and put an overarching story around how an override, since only one person at the table here has been through the override in the town while on the committee before. So first and foremost, how did we get here? At the end of last year's ALG cycle, and this is a direct quote, there was no reason to discuss overrides. The school district side had cut 19 full-time employees in order to quote-unquote right size, and the ALG shortfall, the ALG deficit at the end of the cycle last year was just under $2 million. And 6 of us have been on the ALG process before, 7 of us have been here for many, many years. A $2 million deficit, while on its face is a little scary, seems to always be able to be closed in the past, at least in the past 10 years. So there was no reason to be overly concerned going into summer break. Summer break happens, we start the new ALG cycle, and at the end of October, the superintendent sends a memo. And that memo really is the opening salvo to the concept, to the conversation about needing to have some kind of an override. We had another ALG meeting where we sort of all had deers in the headlights, like, oh my goodness, we're actually having this conversation, aren't we? And then we had a third meeting where both sides sort of plugged in their new numbers for the ALG assumption spreadsheet. Town side change in particular that I want to call out is the capital side. They went from a $700,000 number to a $1.25 million number as soon as they heard there was an override potentially on the table. Where things currently being discussed in the budgeting cycle, the school committee has been tasked to go take what they consider to be a level services budget and knock $2 million off of it. At the last select board meeting, did they meet last night? At the select board meeting of last week, the select board gave the guidance to the town manager to bring forward a full level service budget, a full level services budget. So where exactly are we now? The fiscal year 24 is the budget. That's what we're all operating against now. We've just saw the first quarter roundup. This is in the works. The current ALG plan of December 4th has a shortfall of $11 million. So why the difference, if you do the quick numbers between 113 and 127, it's more than 11. That's because there is the $3 million or so that's baked in for Prop 2.5. So we're currently at an $11 million shortfall with the town asking for a 10% year-over-year growth change, the school district asking for 14% year-over-year growth, and Minuteman asking for just shy of 13 million. So 13% growth. So these are very large numbers. These are double-digit asks across the board. I'd love to say, oh, it's okay, one of them's a small number, so it doesn't matter, but they're all getting to be pretty big these days. So this is the current hole that ALG is trying to fill. And so since both the school district and the town have provided a new set of line items that have been plugged into the ALG plan that would trigger an override, it's important to remember that we need to be able to put these items into sort of 3 buckets. The first bucket of which is something that's just plain not suitable for an override. The second one is something that was either completely unforeseen or thoroughly unavoidable that is going to trigger an override. We probably just have to, whether we like it or not, we have to deal with it. And the third bucket, which is by far the most squishy and the most able to be haggled over bucket, is just budgetary items that get degraded by inflation because the delta between Prop 2.5, you take your 3%, but if everything around you is growing faster than 3%, your ability to pay does get degraded over time. So I did bring to the committee a spreadsheet, I think 2 meetings ago, and I will pop out to that spreadsheet in a minute or so once I go through sort of the philosophies of the 3 buckets. In my mind, what is not suitable for an override is anything that is a cash flow issue. 2 of the items on the school district side, for example, the out-of-district placements and the out-of-district transportation, a lot of, while there has definitely been an increase in cost, there has not been an increase in the circuit breaker triggering levels. So when the superintendent says that the out-of-district costs have gone up 14% this year and are going up another 5% next year, that does not all get passed along to us because the circuit breaker level is exactly the same. And while there is some risk in this number because the two words doing the most amount of work on this slide are the up to 75%, because that number is not a hard and fast guaranteed rule. So that's something that gets worked on every year. A lot of the out-of-district placements and out-of-district transportation is a cash flow issue that will come back into the buckets in 2 years. I'm not saying all of it, but I'm saying a lot of it. And that's exactly what reserves are for. If you know you need a buffer to pay now, but you're going to be able to get the money back in a couple of years, you pay for it out of reserves and you replenish as soon as you can. I also say that something that is not suitable for an override is any new initiative or project. If we're already having enough trouble covering our current commitments, now is not the time to be inheriting new commitments. I also, a corollary to that, or a kissing cousin to that, is the backfilling from a previous grant. If something was hired under a previous grant, it does not mean it's a guarantee of a future commitment that is going to absolutely be covered in all future budgets. Things that are unforeseen and unavoidable, that should be or. The health insurance increase, which hit both entities heavily, was definitely beyond what we would reasonably expect. I don't think either entity normally uses 3% as the expected growth for the following year. They usually use something more like 6 or 8%, but they're looking at 22.8% increases. So that's definitely fits in the unforeseen area. So some of it should be budgeted for. You know, you can't say that every accretive dollar in fiscal year 25 must necessarily be qualified as an override, because you should have been budgeting for some amount of increase year over year. But a fair chunk of it is unexpected, therefore does qualify for, in my opinion, for an override. The special education had a mismatch between what was budgeted for in March and what actually walked the door in late August. And that's where, therein lies an unexpected need. When they added up all of the IEP hours, they found they did not have the staff to cover it. And since the IEP is more or less a contract between the school district and the students, and therefore a contract between the students and the requirements of the state, this does have to be met. There are also assessments we have absolutely no control over. If we have more students go to Minuteman, we're going to have a larger assessment from that side. That was an unexpected budgetary hit. And so I don't have any problem plugging a fair chunk of the unexpected assessments, Minuteman or otherwise, into the category of meriting an override. And then the third bucket, which is the degradation as a result of Prop 2.5, the perils of Prop 2.5 are inflation. Exactly. Okay. So what is being asked of FinCom? The first thing that's being asked of FinCom is to agree to an override of some amount. And we've already agreed to that. We've already agreed that we do not believe it's feasible to stick to the confines of Prop 2.5. Now, that does not mean that we've agreed to any and all budgets, and we've certainly not agreed to a final override number at this time. But we have agreed that we got to do something. I wish I could get rid of this thing. Really can't. Oh well. Next bet is to deliver guidelines to both the school district and the town budget. This was a specific ask in the last ALG meeting. Then as the year goes on, we're supposed to come to consensus on a fiscal year 25 budget. There's an asterisk there. Give me 30 seconds and I'll address the asterisk. Then I also, at this point, I want to make it very clear that we have to make a distinction between defining the size of an override and defining the size tax increase or the budget that we'll support in this next fiscal year. I want to make sure that we start divorcing those opinions right from the start. Then we need to support the override vote, then we need to recommend the budgets at annual town meeting. These asterisks are if we stay inside of ALG consensus. And while it's inconceivable that we wouldn't stay inside of ALG consensus, it is conceivable, because what's going to happen now, our recommendations now, is that each entity come with an A and B budget. One of the budgets is going to be within Prop 2.5. You have to have something in your back pocket. If the voters do not accept an override, you have to have a plan of record. You may not like it may be terrible, it may be, in the words of the school superintendent, it may be catastrophic, but you have to have that budget in hand in case the override does not pass at ballot. The second budget would be the consensus ALG budget. This is the standard process in a non-standard year. This is getting the school district, the school committee, the town side, the select board, and the finance committee to agree to a single number. And if so, yes, then we're all gonna row in the same direction and go to town meeting. If we cannot get to a consensus budget, then it becomes the finance committee's responsibility to bring forth a C budget. I'm not recommending we do that, but I am putting the seed in everyone's mind that we have to be prepared to do so. Because in years past, they come in with something around Prop 2.5, it's close enough, some of us like it more than others, we all hold hands and move forward and make it happen. Override years, that's not a guarantee. Other things that I would like us to adopt as recommendations, no net new FTEs for new initiatives or programs, as I mentioned before. Personnel, so no new FTEs specifically, because personnel is the single largest component of our budget. We always say we are a people-driven business. As for new initiatives and projects, why buy something new if we can't even pay what we own now? And then I do believe that it is our responsibility to do a systemic review of both budgets. There appears to have been some pushback from both sides on that. I believe the guidance we were given was that the ALG should focus on merely giving a revenue number rather than going through expenses. And while I fundamentally disagree with that, that was mentioned at the last ALG meeting. I do believe that if we are going to stand up and put our reputation on the line and say this is the level we need to go to, then I believe we need to have a systemic review of both budgets.
Hold on, I'm going to jump in there for a second. I do believe that it is not ALG's job to sit there and go through every expense, which was the statement being made. It is,
Fair
however,
enough.
our job. Because it's our job, some discussion of expenditures will slip in.
Fair enough. Very good. Appreciate that distinction. Definitely want to scrub expired warrant articles. We might even be able to break loose $250,000 on that one if we get absolutely lucky. Draw upon enterprise accounts and stabilization accounts everywhere. Marianne, yes, this is the third time this evening you're going to hear us say we need to know where all the pools of money are in Mr. Tyndall's old parlance. And then, I also believe that it should be our recommendation not to use an override to meet priorities that have not made the cut before. Having an override should not be a laundry list of, okay, well, we couldn't do this in the past, it wasn't good enough in the past, but now that money's easy again, let's go get whatever we can. So I'm not sure how to put, I'm trying to use fewer words, but the second to bottom line there is if it wasn't good enough when times were tough, in a very real sense, times are even tougher now. So it should be even less likely to be funded. And then the final recommendation that I would like to hear everyone's opinion on when I'm done with the presentation is, I do not believe that we should have an override and use all the money in 1 year. I believe that we should raise the taxes over at least a 2-year period of time, because I don't want to hit the taxpayer with a double-digit tax increase in any one given year. So, give me a second. This is my IT company coming after me for using the work laptop. Okay, well, when the junk gets off the screen here, give me just 1 second. I'm going to try and get rid of as much of the backfill as I can. Where is that Zoom window? It needs to go away. Okay. Sorry.
Adam?
I'll ask a question while he's working. Does it make sense for the budgeting entities to come to the Finance Committee with their A budgets to present them in detail to us prior to them being presented to ALG so that the FinCom can decide whether or not we're going to support them at ALG?
The A budget will be presented to the Select Board. Preliminary budget will be presented to the Select Board next Monday. We all should be there as much as possible. It's not clear that we will be able to be at the table.
Discuss the chicken and egg problem while I get this up and running.
If we cannot be at the table, we clearly should not have more than a quorum there, but everyone should definitely watch the meeting if that is the case. This is why I have proposed we meet the day after, next Tuesday, so that we can divvy up the budget. And I think, would like us to all look at it clearly in more detail than we usually have, but come up with any metrics questions, anything we really want to have to understand the projects and the departments, how they are working with a really detailed light on them. There are things that have been working, but maybe don't as much now. I mean, Prop 2.5 gives you a chance to reset periodically and take the hard look at what's going on, and it's a big part of our job. So I would like us to get the preliminary budget and get into it as quickly as possible, because our next scheduled date would be December 26th, which I presume we do not want to meet on. And then the following date, looks like we will not be able to have part of our budget Thursday then, but that's right before, it's the Tuesday before the budget Thursday. So we need to get feedback to the town, questions to the town as quickly as possible.
And that's both budgeting entities are presenting?
No, that's just the town. I don't know the timeline yet for the school. School is talking about going back to a budget Saturday. I like the idea of having it be spread out over more days personally, because it's, especially if you're getting into really detailed looks at things, it's a whole lot to think about all at once. Are you ready for us, Jason?
Very shortly.
So can everyone, while we're on it, attend a meeting next Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I will post that. Roland?
Are you going to post an agenda for us to attend Monday's meeting as well?
So yes, thank you. That's the next question. If we are able to all attend it, how many of us can be there for Monday? You said you could not, Dave. Christine cannot because of general things. You can be there, Scott? Yeah. Okay. We have a quorum. I will find out if we can be there. I will let you know. If not, a subset of us can attend and the rest can watch.
I can't get this little black slide to go, little black box to go away. What's being blocked is the percent override. So the purpose of this, thank you. The purpose of this slide is twofold. One, to show an override amount used specifically for the budget side. This is not necessarily, thank you very much. This is also to show what percentage override this would be and how it would have an impact on the average single-family tax bill. So the top line is no override use at all. That's just take the Prop 2.5 allowable under Prop 2.5, and the average single-family tax bill will go up $435 next year, and it goes up an extra $132 for every million used of override. If you hearken back to the second slide, I said that we had an ALG hole of $11 million. If we did cover all of it with an override, and by no means this is my recommendation, if we did fill the entire $11 million hole, it's a 10.5% override, but an almost 13.5, a more than 13.5% increase year over year on single-family taxes, which I personally do not believe is going to be well tolerated by the town populace. So the purpose of this slide is to show if we take nice discrete $1 million amounts, what's this going to do to the average single-family tax bill? Leading the horse to water here, if I may, my recommendation And I can pop out to my spreadsheet if you guys would like. But my recommendation, after I put all of the items into the 3 buckets from my perspective, is to take the municipal budget, take last year's number, give it its 3% increase, and then add $934,500,000. Now, this includes some money that I chalk up to it money that's override worthy for Minuteman. I put it in the town bucket because the town bucket has been what's been absorbing it. On the school side, I again take the last year's, the fiscal year 24 budget, give it its 3% override, and I'm adding 3 million and change, which would be a $4 million use of override. And I want to be very careful about my language here because in the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about override size. But I'm proposing using $4 million of override in fiscal year 25, which would have an impact on the average single-family tax bill of $963. Again, 435 is the natural year-over-year from Prop 2.5 plus new growth, and then the $130 more per 1 million increase in levy. Increase in levy used. I should put the word used in at the end there, I apologize. So hold on to that for just 1 minute, and then I'd like to go to a similar conversation about the override. As I said earlier, I wanted us to divorce the fiscal year 25 budget from the actual override. As you guys probably all remember, an override is not we don't get to play with percentages with an override. It has to be a single dollar value that goes on the ballot 2 or 3 weeks before town meeting. So we have to have a single dollar value. I do not believe it should all be used in 1 year. The reason I say that is because I do not want us to spend the entirety of the override, spend all of our gain, and then potentially have to be right back in the same position 1 or 2 or 3 years later. I worry about override fatigue. I would much prefer we take out, if we're going to have this fight, take out enough money to cover a couple of years of a glide path. And then, so I should have had that 4th bullet point up. I was going to edit that, I apologize. So the 2nd, 4th bullet point are similar. It's important to remember that anything we don't use in 1 year will go to unused tax levy capacity, which, by the way, is my absolute favorite form of reserve. It's my favorite form of reserve because it is money that is available to the town to spend when needed, but in the meantime, it's sitting in the taxpayer's pocket. It's not sitting in the town coffers. It's in everyone's individual pocket, which is the best place for it to be. So I like the idea of having some unused tax levy capacity available to us for out years. The other thing that I absolutely need to stress on this slide is agreeing to an override number absolutely does not compel us to agree to a budget number. An override number is something we have to get on board with and get past, but it does not mean that we've automatically relinquished a responsibility for how that increase in appropriatable funds gets used. So, leading the horse to water here. I know this is an eye chart, but the one thing I want to drive home on this slide, and since you see that I've already plugged in an $8 million override number, I think you'll be able to suss out what number I'm going to use on the next slide. But I want to drive home that every time you use an override, you're actually resetting the baseline. So while somebody who moves into town now and has a new 25 or 30-year mortgage is probably more interested in fiscal year 50 than some of the other people in this room, if you look at what happens to the baseline, if we do not have an override, you can see, well, the year-over-year change. Obviously, there's assumptions here of new growth, and that new growth number is just what's been plugged in the ALG plan, and that number in particular is going to bounce around every year. But if you look at what the impact of the override is, it's an extra $200,000 a year right from the start, because it's $8 million times 1.025 every year. So this is the compounding interest, so to speak, of what happens if you take out an override. So just a couple of years from now, the amount of taxation that can be appropriated from the citizenry goes up by $200,000 a year, right from the start. And if you go out to fiscal year 50, which I picked because it's a nice round number, it's the last one that fit on the screen cleanly, that's a almost $15 million delta in the amount of money that can be gleaned. Yes, obviously, this is where inflation comes in. This is where the degradation from inflation comes in. So what is my proposal for an override amount? My proposal for an override amount is $8 million, of which $4 million can be used in the first year. That goes right back to my budget slide from 3 slides ago. I'd like to recommend that they use no more than $2 million in override capacity in the second year. And I would like to try and hold on to that last $2 million, $2,400,000 of unused tax levy capacity as long as possible, allowing for the realization that things happen. Things go bump in the night, things go bump in the budget. So this is my first pass. Christy and I were asked to give a percentage number at the last ALG. I was uncomfortable doing that because I don't believe it should just be a blanket percentage number across the entities. So this is why I have both an override number and a budget proposal number. And then, not for nothing, I figure there are going to be pincushion questions during the discussion section. I'm also happy to show, in fact, I should show, and this is where I suspect more people are going to have a differing of opinions. I did put my assumptions, or this is my opinion, this is where I got to the $4 million number, of taking all the entities that were called out by the town manager and by the superintendent and putting them into the buckets, in my opinion. It originally came to 3.5 million, and I realized I was being super stingy. So I tried to become a little more generous, and I've got it up to almost exactly $4 million, and that was not a target. The 3.5 I just thought was too low. And depending on your mood, you can get carried away very quickly with this, with plugging in these numbers and having this balloon out. So I do want to drive home that a $4 million override has an average single-family tax bill implication just for next year alone of an increase of $964, which is not nothing. Mr. Do you mind if I? Okay, Mr. Ballenhoff.
Yeah, thank you too for putting the work into this. And so it looks like a pretty thorough look at, the impact of an override. And I think this slide is great. Could you just go back to the initial one, which shows the increase in spending projected for FY25? It's maybe 3 or 4 bullet before this one. So, this is presumptuous, but if the total spending is going up by 12.65% in FY25, you're presuming it goes to 3% in FY26, correct?
No, because I allowed for $2 million of override use in FY26.
No, the spending, I mean, not necessarily the override.
Honestly, at this point, since even if we give $4 million in override, and we use, rather than using the $1 million that's called for in the current ALG plan of capital for free cash, if we use 2.5 million, because I believe certified free cash is currently at 5.5 million. So if we bring that down to 3 million, and we use, so I hear your question. No matter what, there have to be cuts on both sides, because even at 3%, even for the following year at 3%, that maybe they can get to it, maybe they're going to cut it all at once, or maybe we're going to allow them to have, since we're allowing $2 million in fiscal year 25, that's a more than 3% growth. This allows them to get to a baseline in a 2-year period of time before I expect them to get back to being able to live within the 3% growth year over year over year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe if I could say your first part a different way is, of the 11 million above, you expect in FY '25 to use 4 million from the override. The remaining 7 million can be made up anyway from free cash or whatever.
Or cuts.
Yeah, so, yeah. No, I guess my point was just simply, I don't know if it's reasonable to say that the growth is going to go from 12.65%, just the spending in general, even if they make those cuts, to 3% next year. So hypothetically, if they cut 7 million off in some form or another, I just think it's really presumptuous to go to 3% for fiscal '26 and '27. So that's just me making an observation. It's not really a question. But I do think that this presentation should have, another year or two of sort of view in it. And the current ALG plan, which is a couple weeks old that I have, is like 2% and 3% spending growth in '26 and '27. And the point is just clearly advocating one way or the other for an override of some magnitude now, and then a year from now saying we have 2 million set aside and maybe another 2 million, when the numbers could be 10% again in FY '26. And then we would say, oh, well, we actually need another 8 million this year, in addition to the 4 from last year, or whatever. I'm just throwing numbers out there, and I don't expect you to have any answers for this. This is more of a question for ALG and the planning.
So my recommendation is, since I believe if we go in front of the taxpayers and we ask them to raise their taxes $2,000 next year, and a 13 to 14% increase in taxes in 1 year, I think we're going to lose. I think if we go forward and put forward, let me go through it. If we go forward and ask for everything on the list right now, I think we're going to get nothing. I think that going at a $4 million use next year would represent about a 7.5%. Would be a 7% increase in taxation year over year. And then using 2 more million the following year, it would be more like a 5% for the following year. Rather, so my answer to your question is, to the taxing entities, this is what we think we can give you. Fix your budgets now. Make your plans, make your cuts now, so that you know, because this is what we believe we can get away with. So that $11 million hole, I don't see us fixing that $11 million hole without cuts, which is why I was happy to see that the school committee has already been given the guidance to knock $2 million off the top. It's a great start. That's not going to be where I think it has to end. And I also think I was shocked that the select board unanimously sent the town manager the task of sending a level services budget, when a level services budget is an $11 million hole, which I don't see a way to fill without it being a double-digit tax increase. So therefore, what my answer to you is, this $11 million hole is a non-starter. There have to be some kind of cuts. We're not going to be at quote-unquote level services next year, because a level services budget is a 13.5% increase in taxes year over year.
For 1 year.
For 1 year. And I think, and I'm very concerned about going in front of the town and asking for an override on a budget that says, we're going to raise your taxes for 13.5% next year.
And then just one other quick point is, we had talked about, and this is just sort of my little view, is, is there, the ability to, land purchases, et cetera, is it worth exploring that option? I'm just throwing that out there. But
Absolutely.
You had a bunch of items as sort of potential, and it could be a conversation the town would want to have is, oh, we have this inventory, is this worth it or is this worth it? And what's our real trade-offs here with those? And I'm just wondering if is it worth, asking the select board or the town manager just to compile that list? I know we have some versions of them in the various plans.
Actually, the town manager did a great job of listing all
Yeah,
the properties in
I
the
saw
back
that.
of the SIP
Mhm,
that we just
the
got from
SIP,
last week. I was
yeah.
super happy to see that. That level of detail is great.
So-
But yes, you're absolutely right. Where I have a
Yeah.
systemic review of both budgets, I should have added systemic review of holdings that could potentially be.
Yeah, and those can be
liquidated.
bigger ticket items. I mean, if we're talking, $2 to $3 million, I mean, that's, I don't know what the market is like for any of that, and I don't know what the ability is to or the interest in moving some of it, but.
I agree with you. I think absolutely everything should be on the table in an override year.
All right, so is the choice we're looking at an $11 million override this year, and basically it all gets spent this year, and then we live within 2.5% in perpetuity, versus what you're proposing, which is an $8 million override, $4 million of which is spent this year, $2 million the next, $2 million the next side. What I'm trying to get at is, are we looking at a $3 million problem in terms of size of override? Or are we really looking at a 11 minus 4, $7 million spending problem in FY '25?
And I honestly can't answer that because I don't know what the projections are for the out years. I am more concerned by the fact that I don't see us doing an $11 million fix next year. Even with, see, currently it's an $11 million hole. Realistically, it's a $8.5 million hole because we're not using all the free cash that we need to use. So, I'm suggesting that we back a $4 million budget, knowing that it's not enough for anybody. But knowing that this is probably, that this to me feels like the right number of what to go back and ask the taxpayers, $1,000 over this next year, and, probably more like another $600 to $700 next year, rather than doing $2,000 in 1 year. Because we then have absolutely there is no promise, there is no guarantee that we're back to a 3% in perpetuity. So I also think that they're better off the sooner you make the cuts, the sooner you right size, the easier it is to bend that out year cost arc.
Yeah. All right, so the way I look at it, the difference between $11 million and $8 million is, it's probably something we can work through. If you're looking to answer the question, how much of an override will the Finance Committee support? I mean, I like your number. 8 million sounds about right. The second question becomes putting conditions on the 8 million in terms of spending. I'd like to agree with you, but I've yet to see a single number on a single budget. None of us have. So I'm pretty good with agreeing with your $8 million. I think it's well thought out, well supported. Until I see something that looks like a budget detail, I'm uncomfortable with saying how much we can spend next year or the year after.
So I referred to this as the chicken and egg problem earlier, because what we heard at ALG was, you give us the percentage that you're comfortable with, and we'll come back and give you a number. And I said, I want to scrub everything and make sure everything is solid before we move forward. And I was told, no, that's not an option. So I am putting this as the marker in the ground of, I believe that it's fair for us we raise taxes by just shy of $800 the year of the big capital override for the boardwalk school and the fire station. I don't want to deviate too much from that because I do want this to pass. So that's why I'm okay with about $1,000 a year increase in taxation. So there is a chicken and egg problem here. I'm happy having put this out because I've now met what I was told I had to meet at ALG. And now we can take a closer look at budgets and see if we actually want to do something. Or maybe it may be the realization that we're not going to be able to support an $11 million override or $11 million in 1 year or $8.5 million tax increase in 1 year once you see these numbers. Maybe that will help sharpen the mind as they go into budget season. But no, I am not on board with a 13.5% increase, $1,900 average single-family tax bill increase in 1 year. I am not on board on that.
So many places to go from here. Steve, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so you guys need guidance from us for an ALG meeting. So in terms of answering the question, you didn't exactly answer the question. They incorrectly asked for a percentage, and you're absolutely right. You need to give them a dollar amount. I'm fine with saying $8 million, but don't spend it all in 1 year. I'm a little less comfortable giving them absolute guidelines on how much to spend.
You're nicer than I am.
I don't think anybody in this committee would argue that point with you. But if you want some guidance, that's my guidance.
Thank you.
So before you got to your presentation of what your recommendation was, when you were showing, if you go back to the slide that shows how much each $1 million increases the average family tax bill, and it's something I've been thinking about for months now, what as a taxpayer, would I like the override to look like, what would seem acceptable to me. I was coming up with double the normal that we've been seeing, and that's kind of, you've hit the nail on the head there. With regard to the chicken and egg problem, I can understand that the budgeting entities will have an easier time going after their budgets with hatchets and knives if they know what overall limit the Finance Committee is going to support. As far as coming up with a C budget, I'm less inclined to want to sit down either as an individual or as a committee and go through the budgeting entities' budgets item by item by item. I think it's much easier to just give them guidance of what we will and won't support at town meeting and let them manage their budgets, which is what they get paid to do. So I would very much support Jason's recommendations for the ALG process as something that we could potentially vote on tonight. I would vote on this tonight, so that the next time you meet with ALG, you can at least say, this at the very least is what the Finance Committee supports.
Adam,
Yes,
we are going to go through the budget line item by line item.
that's fine.
That's the budget we get on Monday. On Tuesday, we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm just saying I don't want it to be the Finance Committee's responsibility to tell them you need to cut this line and you need to cut that line and you need to reduce this one by 25%.
No, but the due diligence needs to be done, and the towns will have done it, the schools will have done it. We will be another group of eyes at it.
Yeah. So I like your recommendations, Jason. I would support this.
And if I may, I didn't start this presentation going, oh, I think $4 million is the right number. I literally started with with what I came to Finance Committee with a couple of weeks ago, which was this spreadsheet, obviously not as clean as it is now, and taking a good, long, hard look at it. And, for example, one of the ones that hurts me the most, I got to tell you, the one that I hemmed and hawed on the heaviest is the Cartwheel Asset Valley Resource Center. This was funded originally through a grant. Well, I want this program, but I can't justify it under my own guidelines, and therefore it got $0 funding in my eyes. So, and because, we have an $11 million problem. Do I want the vast majority of the items on this list? Yeah, I do. Can I say in my heart of hearts, I'm okay with jamming up the taxpayers $1,600, $1,700, $1,900 next year for everything on the list? No, I can't.
And it raises the taxes in perpetuity, as you pointed out, which I'd like to state again.
So remember, it's not the budget that raises the taxes in perpetuity. It's the levy limit that raises the taxes in perpetuity to the tune of $200,000 a year plus with an $8 million override. So I did it organically this way first. Came to 3.5 million and said, okay, I'm being overly tight. And then I allowed it to balloon up to sort of the next level of what I was comfortable with, and I was shocked that it came as close to $4 million as it did. And from there, it's just math. From there, it's $1,000 in tax increase, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the schools are on fire right now, and I would love to know if their part of the 4 million is enough to do what Mr. Martin has previously said we don't want to do, which is cause irreparable harm. In some ways, I am more comfortable, also as a taxpayer, in taking the big jump now if it's going to rescue that. But I do like that. I'm comfortable with the number you came at as an override number.
And the other reason why I wanted to do this particular exercise is because I did not want to just say, raise taxes 7%, and let's do our standard 2/3 to the schools, 1/3 to the town. I don't think that's merited, because if you look at in particular the unforeseen, I think the schools were hit disproportionately with the unforeseen. And that's why I tried to be even-handed on the health insurance numbers, giving the same ratios of surprise to each entity. But the school side has the special education the special education staff number that the town doesn't have. Now, to sort of preempt what the town's going to say is, they don't have as many people as the school side. They've got projects. They've been putting the projects on hold. I'm sympathetic to that concept, but the schools are more on fire. So that's why I did not want to get backed into the corner at ALG of being said, well, just give us a percentage and we'll divvy it up the way we normally do. That's why I thought it was way more important that we do this level of true scrubbing of what's going on. And it ends up being, 75-25, which is not ridiculously off of 66-34, but it is not the standard even split. And again, these are extraordinary times, and therefore I don't believe in just doing business as usual, standard, normal splits.
So a question to that would be, if we decide to make a motion and vote on this tonight, would we also make a motion and vote on what we're recommending as a split between the budgets, or could we just say baseline number, you guys, ALG decides the splits?
I am prepared to hold off. I appreciate your, I don't want a hard and fast vote tonight. I would love a sense of the committee, but I would like to give both entities the opportunity to present their budget numbers, knowing that, the sense of the finance committee is that an $8 million override with 4 million approximately, we'll argue about the final number as we get closer to this session, is a good starting point. Similarly, sense of the committee, are we comfortable with an $11 million increase in taxation for next year or not? So that's what I'm hoping for this evening.
You keep saying $8 million override, and I keep looking at it saying $4 million override.
$8 million override, 4 million used in the first year.
I know that's what you're saying, but the numbers you're showing me, the taxpayer, is, okay, your taxes are going to just go up by 900 plus next year as opposed to the 400.
Correct.
And I have no concept on how hard that is for the average person to be willing to buy it being spread out across multiple years. The narrative is a little harder to tell. I mean, I believe people can understand it. It will come down to some degree to a faith in it being used in all the right ways and spread it over the right time. I guess we have that faith anyhow.
Yeah.
That's how we function.
The other way to do it is to not have as large an increase in the levy limit, but know that we might have to be back here in a shorter period of time asking for another round,
So
which I don't want to do.
I go back to our beloved Mr. Noon. How was that handled last time? Because it was a multi-year override, I believe.
All right, you're testing my memory. We didn't go back. Actually, we never went back for another operating override after 2006. So
But I thought you asked for more than 1 year's worth of.
we did. It was a pyramid override. It had an operating piece, and I believe it had 2 capital. pieces. The operating piece and the first capital piece passed, the larger capital increment failed. But we have never gone back in the last almost 20 years
Do you
and
remember,
asked for another operating override.
do you remember what percentage of the override was used immediately in the first year's, operating cost?
I do not.
Do you remember the narrative on how it was explained to people? I'm thinking of whatever number we come up with as we think is a likely to pass and support the entity's number. If we're giving above that, people who don't agree with it are going to look at the higher number and say, well, your taxes are going up by this much, which it's sort of true, sort of not. Like, they could go up by this much. We are saying they shouldn't next year.
I see what you're saying, but then the outreach that I would try and deliver on that is that I would much rather have unused tax levy capacity than sit at 5% in free cash. So we're gonna have to take free cash down. We're gonna have to take free cash down to 3%, we're gonna have to take it down to our floor. And then I don't want to tie the hands of everyone so that they can't possibly, if there is a need, if there is another unusual year, if there is another expectation, I do want there to be unused tax levy capacity so that going through the standard ALG process where we have to get consensus amongst all 10 representatives, we still have that guardrail in place for future years' taxation. But we're holding the reserve in unused tax levy capacity rather than in cash that's not in someone's actual pocket. It's a nuanced argument, I agree, but this, I'm
All right. I interrupt. Go.
What happens if they go to town meeting with an $8 million override and it fails?
Okay, again, you do not go to the town meeting with
I
an
meant
override, you go to the ballot box.
I meant to the ballot box, and what?
If you go to the ballot box with an $8 million override and it fails, then they are stuck with the B budgets. I keep calling it an A budget, but apparently it's the B budget.
This is why we need to be careful to come up with a number that we think stands a chance of passing, because the whole thing could be shot in the foot. $11 million, especially if you said to use it in 1 year, is not going to pass my
So
estimation.
I'm saying an $8 million override, which would have an impact if it was done in 1 year of $1,500. I would like us to be broadcasting, because by the time we get to the override vote, the budgets are going to have to be pretty darn well baked. I would like us to be doing the evangelizing that, yes, this is an increase in taxation over years, over some number of years, and the most important number is this upcoming first year. That's going to be let's round. It's going to be $1,000 in fiscal year 25, but we're giving ourselves the ability in the future to avoid another override vote if need be.
Would these terms be written into the article that the ballot is voting on, saying
No.
your override is X, it's going to affect
No,
your taxes
no.
by Y?
Nope.
It's just a straight
It
dollar
is-
amount, and that's that, it doesn't say anything
It
else.
is-
So there's no contract with the taxpayer?
No, when I wrote, I was very, I guess I didn't put too fine a point on it. Override recommendation, it must be a single dollar value, and the language of Prop 2.5 is very clear. This is what the ballot shall say, and the only thing you get to do is put in that one number, period, end of story. That is Prop 2.5 override speech. There's nothing else about it.
Okay, I understand that. It's unfortunate that the taxpayer can't make a contract with their towns. When we say, as taxpayers, we're going to vote to give you this money under X, Y, and Z contractual terms. So I understand, Christie, your question, that how do you wordsmith that? How do you tell that story, and how do you make sure that that's
And that is-
understood at the ballot box?
If I may, that is also why I had to put on the list as something that we have to pay attention to, that we may have to come with a C budget.
Because it goes to the ballot box before it goes to town meeting. Town meeting is the
Correct.
place where you can make that narrative and make sure that it's understood.
Correct.
Okay, so let me ask another question. I might have asked this in a previous meeting, but is it possible to have multiple overrides on a single ballot? Where you have an A, B, and C, and
On a
it's almost
single
like
ballot?
it's almost like the voter's choice thing that, sorry.
I don't know. Steve says it is.
It's called a pyramid override, and it's explained in some of those Association of Town Finance Committee documents you probably haven't read. But yes, you can have it. The last one we had was the pyramid override, and I don't know about other towns, but I think usually the lower number wins.
Go ahead.
In this pyramid override, can the town have a ballot question where they're voting on an override that's effective X amount of dollars in year 25, X amount of dollars in year 26, X amount, no?
No, it's 1 year at a time.
1 year
I
only,
believe.
thank you.
So are you saying that you have, on the ballot, you can have a $6 million number, an $8 million, and a $10 million number?
Don't remember all the details of the pyramid override, but yes, there was an opportunity to have more than one number. If we could go back to your first slide, though. Oh, no.
Go ahead.
What would those percentage increases look like with $4 million of override money and maybe $1.5 million of free cash?
Say that again.
Well, you said we had, school budget going up X percent and town budget going up Y percent with a $11 million gap. What does it look like? So what does the town look like if we tell them they can have their share of $4 million of override and $1.5 million of free cash, not $11 million? So it seems like it would be, rough math would be half of those numbers is what I'm thinking, but.
Just to provide a little good news, jump in here. The estimated free cash for fiscal year '24 is actually 5.8 million.
Okay,
So we're north of what we're used to.
so maybe 2 million, I don't know.
So I definitely think that the free cash conversation would also have to be divvied up appropriately between the two sides, and we all be part of the final budget, the final consensus budgets.
I'm just trying to get an idea of what kind of guidance we could give on budgets. So instead of $11 million for next year, you can have 6, I guess is the way we're talking.
So
Plus 2 or something.
yeah,
like
the way that I'm talking is last year's budget times 1.03 plus 4 million plus 2 to 2.8 million in free cash, in use of free cash.
So I can't do those numbers in my head. What I'm trying to get at is that
So that would be
5% increase, a 6% increase?
for the average single-family tax bill?
No, for the budgets, for the town and the school budgets.
Yep, we could plug that in. I'll plug that in now to the ALG spreadsheet. Give me just a minute.
Okay.
Jason, it sounded to me dangerously like you were saying that the use of free cash could be used for the operating budget, which would just run us into trouble in the following year.
My opinion of this is that, my belief is that there have to be cuts now. And that if we use free cash, well, it's a double-edged sword. I do not believe we dare go to the taxpayer and ask for an override without having drawn free cash down to the floor. If we end up using free cash for operating expenses, which is against our guidelines, the expectation is that that is a one-time fix, and they need to have adjusted their budgets in such a way that they don't come back to that well in the future, because the well is now dry, because we're at our floor.
But it runs the risk of, I agree, free cash needs to be used. We need to use reserves to bring this in control, but if it's not one-time expenses, we're just kicking the can down the road.
Which is why we make it clear, this is all we can give you now. Start making your budgets appropriately now, because this is all we can give.
So I wonder if if the use of extra free cash this time to help with some budgeting softens this year's crunch. If we do only say 4 million, 5 million, whatever that number ends up being, they're going to get another 2 million the following year. So that is just a way to absorb it a year early, but then not.
Oh, no, I understand that. I just want to make sure that we have an idea that in the next year, the number they have to go forward with is, in addition to the 2 million, is usable.
Yep.
Agreed, but I'm trying to give, like I said, I'm trying to give a runway, a rampway, which is why I don't want to just say, we'll do a $6 million override and we'll do all $6 million in the first year and keep our reserves at 5%. I don't think that's a good approach either. But yes, I believe, I was, you and I were sitting next to each other at the last select board meeting. I was shocked that all the select board members said, no, let's just go to level services budget. When we know we have issues, we know we can't possibly meet the $11 million problem that we have now. So go ahead, Christine.
So I guess I'll go back to statements I've made before, that the entities have both been doing more with less, or at least the same with less, and that they've been giving us slim budgets that we've been, appreciative of, as they've met the goal of staving off an override for as long as possible. But realistically, going forward, I want to see a budget that we all agree maintains the services we all agree we want maintained. And that doesn't mean necessarily cuts. It also doesn't mean sudden added spending. It means what's the right budget that addresses the continued services that we all agree the town should provide, the continued maintenance that the town should provide, and the continued staffing that makes sense to run the town the way we want it run. And I want to know what that number is, more than I'm interested in whether or not they give us a level service budget, a cut budget, or an increased budget. And then we can look at what that budget is and make some sort of determination if we agree at what we're going to receive for that money is the right way forward. Or if it's not. Because if we continue to, if they are cutting and cutting and cutting, and we continue to ask them to cut and cut and cut, and then it becomes unsustainable, we're going to have to pick services to cut. So if that's the answer, then that's the answer, but I'd rather talk about it in that way than to just say, well, you need to cut. You can't give us a level services budget. I want to see the right budget, and then we can look at it and determine if it's too much and why. But just a general idea that whatever number you did last year is not, we want to see less than that. I don't know that that's true. Same for the schools.
I'm going to split the difference on you and Jason. I think you said a key phrase in there that it needs to be the right budget. I think all services need to be looked at, and I don't think you disagree with that. This is an opportunity to comb through the budget we have. I think that's actually part of what you get, a benefit from Prop 2.5. But at the same time, I think, as I said before, the school's on fire. And if we're going to put that out, we might need to have the town cut to get to a level that will be accepted by the taxpayers in terms of getting an override for something, because everyone's dead. I mean, not literally, okay. It's bad if no override happens. But I'd want to do that with a plan to shift the budget back towards the town to make up ground that was lost. I'm certainly not proposing that any cuts that were made on the town side would be permanent. I don't think any of us think, like, some of what they're talking about is potentially delaying buying a new fire truck that we need. I don't think anyone would view that as excessive spending. Clearly, that's something that needs to happen. The question is, how many of those things need to happen this year to get us out of this year's hole.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. What I was hearing was something more that I thought of as structural cuts to to what's in the budget, as opposed to, yeah, when fire trucks get old, we need to replace them, but maybe we could wait another year, maybe we'll get more favorable borrowing, maybe the revenue will go up. I'm completely fine with some level of deferred, I just want to.
But there might need to be structural cuts. I would like to look at some of the programs and say, okay, are we getting our money's worth?
Sure.
Out of
That's
this?
different than just whatever you've been doing, it's not sustainable. They've already been absorbing cuts that we haven't really accounted for. Actually, we have. It's in our spreadsheet. It shows that you had this much money and your money has climbed at this rate, but the bite taken out of it has climbed at this rate. So they've already been doing less with what they have. So, I'd be shocked to find that there's a lot of room for cuts, but again, we need to look at the services that we're going to pay for and say, do we want to keep funding these services? Is this the right way to fund them?
And
Whatever.
I think the town actually does this analysis, but we don't see it, and we see some of it. The taxpayers don't see it. And that needs to happen, in my opinion, for us to get through this. We need to convince people that everything has been looked at in a higher degree of detail publicly. And not that anyone's been trying to hide anything, it's just the details haven't been presented necessarily in a very easily digestible way.
To get philosophical for a moment, our taxes are the price that our taxpayers are willing to pay for essentially a basket of services at certain levels that they desire. Like any economic transaction, and we've all gone through it in the last couple of years, when the price of something you used to like to buy at a certain quantity or quality goes up double digits, sometimes you reassess what you're willing to pay for that service. We're at one of those inflection points right now. For years, we've trained people that their taxes go up 2.5% a year and they get a level of service. We're now going to tell them what it really costs to get those services. They can decide it either way. They may not be willing to pay what they used to say they wanted. Demographics have shifted in town. Everybody values education. The question is, how much do you value it if you haven't had a kid in the system in 15, 20 years? That helps your property value, but that only is realizable if you're going to sell your house. So, yeah, we're at something of an inflection point with our taxes. And just because in the past we've always opted for this level of service and quality of service, doesn't mean that the new group of taxpayers will make the same decision. So, yeah, we have to go through the budgets.
And if I may, Christine, when I say there have to be cuts, this is not me saying, go fix your budgets and there have to be cuts. This is me saying, if we agree that a $4 million override use in this coming year, which increases taxes by $1,000 a year, if we agree that that is the right level, I believe we're going to hear from both sides that they cannot present what they feel are level services budgets with this amount of money. And so where you and I are not in agreement, I am very leery of going much higher than $4 million in override use in 1 year, because I don't want this to blow up in our face and we get left with nothing.
I just ask a quick clarifying question. In the slides, it said a number of places the ABRSD budget. I just wanted to clarify if that meant budget or assessment.
I'm sorry, that meant assessment.
I think that's a mistake throughout the slides.
Fair enough.
And secondly, did you apportion the budgetary expenses for the school district to the assessment? Or did you take them all out of the assessment? So when you, and your spreadsheet where you show the budgetary issues on the school district side,
Yep.
did you apportion them to Acton?
No, I
Or-
used the whole number. I did not use the .85 number.
I think those numbers might be apportioned.
But I don't believe they are on
No,
his
he's
slide.
right, he's right, because I'm pulled the numbers directly from the superintendent's memo, which is going to be district-wide.
So just so you know, Acton's share of the total budget, not counting Boxborough, not counting state aid, is somewhere between 67 and 68% of the total AB budget. So you can multiply those by 0.675 or 0.68 or whatever you want to do. That number goes all over the place, from year to year, depending on, when I say all over the place, plus or minus 2 or 3%, because it depends on the amount of state aid, it depends on a lot of things.
Yep.
E&D use actually moves that number. So,
And to that end, for example, even the number that I had for health insurance, which was pulled off of the superintendent's memo of 1027 is already stale. So if I were to chew that up again, I'm actually off by another 1.3 million that I would, which I would normally apportion to the school side. So I'm still in a situation where I see a disproportionate need on the school side than on the municipal.
sure, but I'm just trying to understand the numbers that were in your slides. And so when you said 3% plus 3 million and some odd, that's 5 or 6 million. That gets divided by 0.675, right? So it's about 45% more in terms of school district budget, right? So it's about $7-8 million total. So I just wanted to clarify that, right? Because if you said it's assessment, then the amount of the ABRSD budget is quite a bit more than that. Again, going up maybe by 45%. So, and finally, I'm wondering if those slides will be attached to the minutes.
They have to.
Thank you.
Just one point of clarification. As I understand the current revenue situation with the region, it's going to be flat with last year. So any additional spending is going to be incremental. They're not going to get any more revenue. So you're looking at, our impact's going to be more like whatever Boxborough takes 15% away from it, not 30% away from it.
Sure, it's just that spreadsheet should make some assumption about that, whatever that assumption is.
Steve, you're saying state aid, transportation aid, et cetera?
Yeah, they're predicting that dead flat. So any incremental expenses are not going to get the benefit of that revenue. So you'll get the benefit of giving Boxborough whatever it is, 16 or 17%, but that's it.
Agreed.
So where does that leave us with the numbers? We can view that a few different ways. We can say 4 million and apportion it differently between the entities.
Yeah, so I think to what I said to Mr. Nolde, I don't want to be tied to a hard and fast, even though I have a recommended number on this presentation, I don't want to be tied to that number until we finally see the budgets. But I do want to put forward a marker that I don't believe using more than $4 million in, over and above Prop 2.5 next year is a good idea. Because I believe that puts us at right around $1,000 for the average single-family tax bill. That leaves us with some unused tax levy capacity with a similar sized override as was done in the past. And so I'm more interested in getting the feedback on is a $4 million / $1,000 a year tax increase, the sense of the committee as we go back to ALG. Yeah, anybody want to jump in?
I'm more comfortable with the $8 million total, and then how it's portioned out. We need to see the budgets before we figure that out, personally.
I am not on board with $8 million in 1 year.
No, that's not what I'm saying. You suggested that in order to responsibly solve this problem, 8 million portioned over 3 years was the number that would probably do the trick. And I think there's been a lot of nodding, and that sounds like it might be the answer. But, so I'm more comfortable with going back and saying, some form of larger number first, smaller number, unused tax levy capacity held for that third year. We're starting with 4. Let's talk from there.
Where's your cap for the first year?
To me, it's driven by need.
Okay.
I could easily say it's 4 million. Don't want to hear another, don't want to hear anything else. And then I could see the budgets and find that it's not possible, or it's more than possible. So, I don't personally want to, draw any line in the sand on that first year. I think, I'd like to keep it as low as possible, but I don't know what that is.
I have a hard time imagining people paying more than the $4 million increase next year. The increase associated with the 4 million. To Christine's point, whether that is enough, we don't know. But that's sort of my gut on the top of what I can be comfortable that a majority would support.
Do you think that we're going to trip over ourselves if we say a number north of 4 million for the override value, but we are advocating that we keep it at 4 million for next year? Do you think we're going to trip over ourselves? Do you think we're not going to be able to sell that message when it comes to the ballot?
I would look for more guidance
Okay.
on that. I think you have to be more nuanced in the discussion, and nuanced is always,
Dangerous.
yeah.
So I'm hearing Christine say, let's see where the number falls. I'm hearing you say that 4 million is about the most that we should concretely ask for in any 1 year. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Okay.
I hoped that a number north of that could work, but that's the number so far I am most comfortable with. Again, having not been around this block and recognizing that the demographics have changed, it's intriguing to me because we have a number of people who have moved into town with small kids who bought expensive houses, but we also have a growing population of people above the age of 65. So I don't know how that, and it's who comes to the ballot.
And it's purely anecdotal, but the number of families who I've spoken to in the last 6 months who said that they're leaving vapor trails in here as soon as their youngest child graduates from high school, that number has gone up and has been, that phrase has been used more in the last 6 months than it's been in the last 6 years in my conversations around town.
Personally, unless interest rates fall and housing prices fall elsewhere too, if you look around, you have to go pretty far to find taxes that aren't somewhere similar to what we're doing here. So I know there's a talk, we always said it when we moved here, it was like, oh, as soon as Allison graduates, we're out.
Yep.
Where are we gonna go?
But there's a lot of people who are saying to me, they no longer need a 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom house when they have no kids left at home. So then it just gets turned over. Then the housing just gets turned over.
My less than 3% interest rate is gonna hold me here a long time.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Sorry, another clarifying question. I was wondering how the average tax rate was determined. I can look at those slides, but in the DOR calculator, it shows $104 increase for each $1 million of new taxes on a $650,000 house.
To answer your question directly, I calculated that number by going to the latest ALG spreadsheet, tax impact draft 7-year tab, cell E6, and adding in $1 million increments. So in other words, I used all of our numbers and the latest ALG spreadsheet to get the most accurate number I could, rinsing it through the entirety of our own numbers.
Thank you. I can do my own comparison between that and the DOR calculator. So Thank you.
But to give you the exact number of how I found it, that's what it is. Cell E6, tax impact draft 7-year, latest ALG spreadsheet.
That also just depends on when DOR updated their website last and at what rate they're using as well. I think also we got to be clear when we're talking about this whole thing is that it's in addition to the regular 2.5% tax increase. So your override's going to be on top of your regular 2.5.
The numbers Jason was showing is all in. It's $435 if you do nothing. And then the
Well, then you baked
900
in the-
plus
then you baked
is
in the rest of
including
it,
that
each
435.
million.
It's $435 is table stakes. That's the B budget.
That's,
And then it's $132 per million in tax levy used for next year,
in addition to.
in addition to the 435 that is table
And then
stakes.
that addition is, that number that you have in that spreadsheet includes the 435 in that.
My impact on average single-family tax bill for a $4 million override use next year is a total of $963, which is the amalgam of the 3%, which is 435,
Yeah.
and 4 times 132 to get to the total number.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, next question is, do we give guidance on how to split that up between the two entities? Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm seeing response from 3 people.
I'll say it again, I haven't seen a single budget number. So I'm not ready to say who's more deserving, if either one is.
I'm seeing a greater budget need, but maybe that fits within the general formula. Isha, Roland, Scott?
I'm kind of where Steve is. I kind of want to see numbers, like, before I, like,
Well, I'm sorry, they have asked specifically for percentages. What I'm hearing is we're not comfortable giving a percentage. We think we have an overall number that is,
Yeah.
could potentially be accepted, but divvying up between the two entities, we don't have guidance on.
That's ALG's process.
Yeah, and it ends up, we're part of ALG, so we can't totally pawn it off. We'll get the towns,
If they really want a number, we can give them a number, but they won't like it. I'd rather see
Well,
what they're asking for before I, start saying,
initially look at the ALG spreadsheet, that's what they're asking for.
And that's why I did this
So
exercise.
Yeah.
we can give
Jason
them
has some
Jason's
numbers.
number,
Can you not get back on?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Jason has some numbers for us, which is how he got to the 4 million. It sounds like we need to adjust this based on what Mr. Martin was saying.
And it's also entirely, give me just 30 seconds for this to finish cropping up. It's also entirely possible that you'll look at the buckets that I put things in and not necessarily agree with them. Okay. Then I have to do this, 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 this.
Would a simple way to put this be to make a statement, something to the effect of, Finance Committee supports an override that does not increase the average tax bill by more than $1,000 in year one, doesn't use more than $2 million additional above 2.5 in year two, and reserves another $2 million for year 3 or 4 beyond?
I'm game.
We need sense of the committee on this.
It's not a percentage.
Correct. It's not a percentage.
That leaves all the math open to the equations effectively, right? Don't affect the taxpayer by more than X dollars,
So Roland, are you comfortable with the $4 million number, or do you think that's too high, or do you think that's too low right from the start?
I don't know without seeing the numbers, obviously, and that's what Steve alluded
Chicken and
to
egg.
Well,
Okay?
you know,
This is, we're going in circles here.
I know.
Okay? So, Adam, you're comfortable with 4 million?
I'm comfortable with an override that stays under $1,000 for the total average family tax bill increase for next year.
Very good. Isha, do you want to weigh in?
Not at this point. I think I'd like to see numbers.
Okay? Steve?
Can we do the math? What's the municipal budget you're working on? What's it?
The municipal.
24, which
Yep.
24 municipal budget?
Sure. The 24 municipal budget that I'm using is pulled directly off of the spreadsheet, off of the ALG plan.
12.4?
It is 12.4, off of the 12.4 ALG plan. I am pulling off of total town. So 38,538,251 times 1.03.
Have you done that, or should I get out my calculator?
I got it calculated right here. $38,538,251 times 1.03. That puts us at 39.7. If you add 934,
And make that $2.1 million, which is what percent of 38.5?
wait, where are you putting that $2 million? Where are you getting that 2.1 million?
Difference between 38.5 and 39.6, I guess 1.1, plus, what are you saying, 9?
Steve, can you use Isha's mic?
So your 3% is worth 1.1 million, and then what are you giving them?
I'm giving them 934,500.
934,000.
Yep.
So that comes to 2.0. $2 million is what percent of 38.5?
%.
There's your percent.
Okay. And we can do the same thing on the school side as well.
Yep.
On the school side, I'm pulling from, wrong digit. I'm pulling from 71,669,754. $2.15 plus, and I understand where Dave Martin's coming from, but for the sake of easy numbers, 3.06. 5.2. Plus 3.0. Idiot. Sorry. Did that wrong.
It's basically 5.2.
Equals. This is why I have so much respect for what the town manager did at the last ALG meeting. He whipped out the spreadsheet and laid it to rest. I thought that was very well done. Times 0.03. Do 1.03. Just a second. I finally figured out what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Plus
If you want to take the,
305, just a second. I know, I have an idea. 305,850.
yeah, I took that number and
305,850
multiplied it by 0.85,
Equals,
which would apportion out the, assuming that was the full number, 0.85 is what Acton pays approximately.
yeah, I'm going to leave it at even though I know that it's, because I like that $4 million number because I like the concept of keeping it right at that $1,000 limit. Divided by the original cell.
Yeah, that's using numbers that become then less defensible.
Then I am off. Plus, I did something wrong. Okay. So that's correct. Oh, it's the difference. It's the difference. That's what I'm doing wrong. Equals that plus that equals that divided by 7.3, 7.26% school side.
Okay.
There are numbers.
I would still like you to fix that school number.
So that brings down the overall.
No, I think $4 million is the right amount. I think we are not correctly defending it anymore.
Okay, so I can take that number down by 15%, yeah. 15%, because that's the split out. So and that is this number here, stop. Just take this number. And now we're talking 6.62%.
6.63. Okay. Just saying.
Done. There.
Oh,
So-
hold on, but that's a total.
No, that's the percent increase year over year. If you take the 3% plus the amount that I put in the buckets as being worthy of an override and multiplying just the part that I said is worthy of the buckets by 0.85 to true up for Mr. Martin.
And what's the total overall increase at that point?
2.599 million, 2.6 million, as opposed to 3.05
For the schools?
for the schools. That would actually set that, if we then go plug that number in, we figure out that the average single-family tax increase is not 965, it's a little less.
Well, at which point I'm inclined to bump the whole number up to 4 million. and
Which is
take it
why I
down.
left it at that number to begin
No,
with.
you can't have nice math to prove something and then throw it all out.
Okay. But you just said that you'd be willing to bump it back up to 4 million.
Ah, you need to defend it then. Put numbers in.
In my buckets?
Yes.
Okay, I can do that. I can do that after the fact, figure out which bucket I want to put all this in.
All right, so what we're looking at is willing to support an $8 million override in total, but willing to only support a 5.2% increase to the town budget and a 6.6 increase to the school district's assessment. Is that the guidance we want to provide? Sorry, I'm taking over your meeting, Madam Chair.
I'm saying no because I think we have declared that $4 million has a real possibility of passing. And I think the pain in the entities is such that giving them the $4 million next year would be of greater benefit.
So to that end, do we not give a percentage number at this time and let them bring their budgets back to us first?
Well, if we're going to do that, we could have been out of here a half hour ago at least.
Again, we have a chicken and egg problem here. We're being asked for one thing and we're,
Well, we computed the percentage increases. If you need some rounding latitude, fine. Round it to to get to your $4 million. But the percentages should look something like 5.2 and 6.6, plus or minus a few tenths.
Very good.
I think we're agreeing with your 4 million, Christie. So if you and Jason want to go back and just manipulate those numbers so that it's there, that's the percentage.
And Christie, I can work on the spreadsheet and get it over to you for your perusal, so we can get to.
Okay, so we're agreeing on 4 million and whatever percentage.
Yeah.
But we can swing that percentage any way we want to.
Yes, we can.
It's not like we're going to lock in.
No.
No.
That's true, but we send a message with how we
Sure.
push it, and we want to agree on what that message is.
And so my high-level percentages here, I was saying that we should come with a 75%, $4 million, $3 million on the school side, $1 million on the town side. That's the crux of what my argument came out as.
Sense of the committee?
And knowing that neither entity is going to like those numbers. Let's be very clear, both entities are going to say that's not enough.
I recognize we need to see budget numbers. They also need to see something from us,
Yeah.
to have some idea where we're lining up. So,
There it is.
I'm not going to accept a just let them show me the numbers at this point. Yeah.
So we're talking about this $4 million and how that's going to impact the budgets. But we're not really talking about how a greater use of reserves would increase that number.
Good point.
So it's 4 million, 3 and 1, notwithstanding greater than average use of reserves.
Mhm.
So,
And therein lies we definitely have some wiggle room to figure out what we're going to do once we see the budgets.
right, yeah. I mean, if the guidance comes back from finance that looking into what other towns have done and what levels we can be comfortable bringing reserves down to, that gives us something to play with as far as getting us over this first year
Mhm.
into the next couple of years. Okay, so just keep that in mind.
Very good.
So you're saying free cash can be added to that?
Yeah. And we'll most likely have to be.
Yeah, I would even say free cash should 100% be spent down to 3% floor, which is our general floor anyway. And when we don't typically have 5.8 million, we don't have any problem bringing it down to 3% floor. And before we changed our spending practices, they actually spent below the 3% floor, and then revenue collected back up to, turned in back up to above the 3% floor. And so, my guess is that we're going to be safe to go below that 3% floor should we decide that that's a smart thing to do. So, just keep all that in mind.
With the caveat that we not be, in effect, shifting operating expenses to free cash that can not in the following year be taken up, or the following few years taken up as operating expenses. But that should get triggered with the increase in the tax levy over time, ideally.
Ideally.
Okay. I don't want to vote, I just want to know where we stand. What I've heard is $4 million over next year, $8 million over a few years is our recommended override level. We are saying for the first year, based on the research we've done, et cetera, that we're looking at a 1 million recommendation for the town, 3 million for the school, with the idea that money on top of that can be found in free cash use one time.
Once we see the budgets.
Yeah. Does that sound like what we've agreed on?
And free cash not below the floor.
And free cash, yes, I had that, sorry. But spent down to the floor. Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And the
Yeah,
stabilization
stabilization fund,
fund
what
needs
do
to
we
be
think about that?
drained for anything capital.
I want to see all the numbers. I want to see all those accounts. I mean, she's heard it 4 times now. She's on it.
I'm sorry, John wanted to share something with us about the budget and the ALG upcoming.
Thank you. John Mangiarotti, Town Manager. Very impressive process and data analysis. I look forward to looking at that. Some interesting things to bring forward. And certainly help me with what I'm doing Monday, which is presenting the budget to the Select Board and to as many of you that can be there. As we do every year, we're working very hard to comb through how we do things and find if there's ways to do them more cost effectively. And we have a few ideas that we're working through. But the one particular idea to reduce the costs for operations for us is a financial policy. And I didn't feel comfortable moving forward, advancing that idea before I got input from you all. So it's late and it's last minute, but if there's support for this generally, I would include it in the budget proposal that I'm bringing forward Monday night. The basic idea is related to OPEB, which I know is a subject that's near and dear to all of you. To those following along at home, it's other post-employment benefits. We contribute an amount, approximately $600,000 every year to pay off our unfunded liability for OPEB. And that unfunded liability is the retiree healthcare costs for people that are working right now. That's what we're trying to pay down to make sure that when I retire in whenever that is, that the health insurance money is going to be there to pay for me for the rest of my life. At the same time, the current people that are retired, we're paying for those out of the regular budget. And so, we intentionally didn't touch the OPEB trust for the first 10 years or so that it's been around because we want to build that money up. And I think we're at a point now where I think we can start the transition very slowly of starting to use some of that funding to pay for the retiree costs in the current day, in addition to continuing to pay for most of them out of the budget. We pay, I think, $700,000 to $800,000 about for retiree health insurance every year out of the operating budget. I'm proposing that in FY25, we start authorizing up to $300,000 to be expended from the OPEB trust to pay for retiree health care costs. But at the same time, continuing the practice of contributing at least $600,000 to the trust every year. So as Mary Ann and Ellie mentioned earlier, we write a check to the OPEB trust on the first day of the fiscal year, that $600,000 goes in there, and then in my proposal, throughout the year, we would use up to $300,000 from that trust to pay for current year retiree insurance premiums. So it's a new way of funding our unfunded liability, and it may push the timeline out a little bit, where I think we'll be done in 10 years. If we do this, it might push it out a little bit. But we're also paying for our pension unfunded liability at the same time. That pension liability is mostly for people who started working before employees contributed to their own pension. And so I think we'll pay that down in 2034 or so. And once we do that, we can shift all the money that we're contributing towards that liability back to our OPEB liability. And I think we'll be in a pretty good spot. That's a move or a process that many of the communities have done. I believe the school district has implemented a similar practice for how they manage those two unfunded liabilities. And so that took longer than I thought it would, but is there any feedback you have on that concept at this point?
We're all looking at Steve.
Okay. Last year, I would have said no. And when the schools proposed going to that, I told them that, relying on Middlesex retirement fund for the future is a tricky thing based on my experience with them. Under the present circumstances, I think it's a perfectly rational thing to do. We have been contributing for 10 years. We haven't touched the money. Your OPEB liabilities consist of both the retirees' current obligations and putting away money for the current employees for the future. we've been paying for the retirees pretty much out of pocket and putting all the money towards the current employees. Under the circumstances, I see nothing wrong with beginning to take some of that money out to pay for the retirees. So I'd recommend it, even though it depends on Middlesex to bail you out in 2037, but you know what? I won't be here. In fact, that's exactly what I told Dave Vertolino a few years ago, and he's not here either, so.
I'm not as willing to make that change for the simple reason of one of the main things that we have consistently said that the town has done a stellar job on is funding our liabilities in the future. In fact, I continue to ask the school district to do more because they're looking still at something like a 30-year sunset of all their liabilities. I understand why you would need to do it on a short-term basis, on a one-year basis, for example, but I still think that getting fully funded is good for a number of reasons. One, once you're fully funded, you're less likely to have a large shortfall from a actuarial change or a recalculation at any one time. Another reason why it's a good idea to be fully funded is because when you go to negotiate with potential new employees, you can say, listen, we're not Detroit, you're guaranteed to get your pension here, so let's make sure that it's done. Let's make sure that it's fully funded now. If you're saying you want to do this on a 1 or 2 year basis just to get through a particularly dark time and then resume it, then I'm more amenable to that. But no, I don't think it's time to put your foot off the gas on getting to fully funded. And then the last reason why I would like us to get to fully funded is for fear that this no longer becomes something that just gets tracked and becomes something that is actually a mandatory liability from the state.
All right, to me, it feels like we do need to find some ways to create a little space in our budget. Just looking at the way costs have eaten up what's available. Based on what you presented and what Steve said and listening to what Jason said, it does feel like, it's not a hugely risky, proposition as far as getting to fully funding on OPEB. So, I think it does give just some spots in our budgets where maybe we could get a little breathing room. That doesn't seem like a big risk as far as I'm concerned, so I would be in favor of moving in that direction.
Just to quickly respond, I think, and I agree with you that it's something that I'm proud of, and when we talk to the rate agencies, it's something that we start with our OPEB, and that's specifically why I didn't propose to reduce the budget allocation from 600 to 300. It's why I proposed the mechanism that keeps the contribution the same and allows us on an annual basis to decide how much at town meeting we would appropriate from OPEB trust. Maybe in what I'm proposing this year is 300. Maybe next year you want to say we only want to do 150, but the 600 is not going to change. So that, and I agree with you. And so I just wanted to clarify that it would be something that I propose for next year, and it's something that we would review every year going forward. But if we knock that budget down by 300, it's a harder conversation the following year to restore it. So thank you for the feedback. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if we forecast what drawing down, albeit a small amount each year, would mean for the overall reserves?
We can do that. We haven't at this point, but we could figure that out, try to figure it out.
I'm not sure if it's what Isha just asked. I'd love to know how far this pushes out the fully funded date.
The OPEB calculation is a pyramid of assumptions, and changing one variable takes an actuary to really calculate it out. I'd say we're probably at fully paid in 2033 now. We'll probably push it out 5 years, something like that. So I make, it's a guess, but it's been a good investment year. The biggest assumption is, how well your portfolio will perform over time. That is compared to your liabilities. So it's a guess, but it's an educated guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to skip the point of view.
Thank you.
And unless anyone has very timely liaison reports, we will skip that for tonight, too. Our next meeting will be next Tuesday. I'll let you know how many of us can attend the select board meeting on Monday.
I'm going to try to be there.
I hopefully know by Thursday. Anything else? Hold on. Scott's ready. Okay, Scott, go ahead, please.
I'd like the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
This is unanimous. Thank you, everyone.